Okay, hold on. I'm over at YouTube right now.
Okay. All right, so I'm approving your third party send.
It'll show full screen if you hit the area up above there called slideshow.
That's right. And the funny thing is the notation that I'm screen sharing from Zoom is covering that. So there we go.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm
I
doing.
hear you.
Right, okay. So slideshow. And so I want to from the beginning, I assume.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
Or you could try down to the lower right. You've got that there's a little slide bar, but just to the left of it is a screen. Hit that one. That usually works for me. Yeah, that one there. Although it seems to be thinking, so maybe we just need to wait.
Bang it again.
Yeah, for some reason it's not doing full screen.
Yeah, and it may be I know what's happening. I have split screen. So it's throwing the full screen over to my secondary screen.
Oh, okay.
So I just recognize that as the issue. So
Disconnect that.
yeah, I can do that manually. There we go. Thank you. Was it Jack that suggested that? That was perfect.
Okay, I guess we're ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, so Barbara, you're seeing the screen that we had planned on, right? So this is the
Yes,
slideshow and everyone sees it correctly.
your title page.
Excellent. That's the starting point. Thank you everyone for paying attention and welcoming me. This is my second year as a member of this wonderful association, and I think I come somewhat qualified because I actually did in my academic world major in English and history, and I minored in geology. And it was late in my career that I got actually more intimately involved with the mining industry. I still am a active consultant in the business where my side of the equation is not a technical or a geological uh, participant in the forward momentum of the industry from rare earths to gold, silver, and coal. But I did go to a school that was in the part of Virginia, so I did know the coal miner's daughter.
Peyton, I'm sorry, I muted you. So didn't hear that. So you'll need to unmute yourself, please. There we
Okay.
go. Sorry about that.
My preamble is the education I had in my undergraduate, which was in history, English, and a minor in geology. But I went to school at James Madison University in the western part of Virginia. So many of my friends were coal miners' daughters and sons. And I was always intrigued.
Lost him again.
Okay. Now you froze up.
Clear now?
Yeah, we can hear you and I can see you moving. Okay.
Okay, good. Um, Interesting. I just got a notice that my internet connection was unstable. So maybe Verizon in my area is having an issue. But Barbara, feel free to raise your hand again next time that happens. So I'll make sure to go back and catch up.
I will.
I moved to Denver following my client and my passions, and I was offered an opportunity to assist with a very famous and historical project in the western part of the Nederland area of Boulder County. And this is a beautiful place. As you can see, you're looking across the Peak to Peak Highway, and this is the entrance drive to one of 27 mines that was prospected in existence in the late 1800s. And this is called the Cross Mine. You are looking east over the Profile Buttes Formation, and behind this photograph would be more of a western view, and it's really the back door of the Rocky Mountain National Park. So this area is 10,000 feet, and it is harsh in the winter and can be harsh in the summer as well. But it has a natural beauty, and I always say to people that we in Colorado are blessed in the sense that these wildflowers just pop up on their own. The flora and fauna are amazing. And you're actually looking across a field of mine waste that was created in late 1800s and continued into the next century. And I think it actually has some beautiful geologic features to it. And again, these daisies just pop up roadside. And I've always been intrigued by the vibrant nature of the beautiful views that you get here. This is an old rendering of the map. So now I'm reversing that prior photograph. And as you can see, this is the Rocky Mountain profile. And Long's Peak is this one way back here. I've always been a fan of the fact that we have a wonderful intersection between folklore and history and science. And there is this wonderful book written by James Michener. And as you know, Michener's greatest talents was his ability to take folklore and verbal history, as unreliable as it might have been, and create a wonderful novel out of it. And one of my favorites is Centennial, about the birth of our state of Colorado. And it's the Centennial State because, of course, it was 1876 at the 100-year mark for our nation. But novelist or historian, he borrows from history and he borrows from fiction. And in the book written by James Michener, there is this protagonist in the early beginning, and he's a French trapper who had found his way into the Front Range pursuing beaver, and his name was Pasquinel. And he is the quasi-history folklore was that he had heard tale of an Indian a Ute Indian sub-chief who had shot a Pawnee sub-chief dead, and he had used a bullet that had big magic. And in Mishner's book, that big magic happened to be that it was a strange color. It was orange and gold in nature. And Pasquinel, his eyebrows went up, and he wanted to go find out where the resource actually came from, as any smart guy would want to know. He approached the Ute sub-chief, and by then the guy was onto him, and he wouldn't tell Pasquinel where indeed the Happy Valley, which is what is noted in the book, where the material came from. So Pasquinel decided that his solution would be to court the chief's daughter, and indeed he did. And in the book, he ended up marrying the chief's daughter and having his second family in the Front Range of Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. And he also, like many other trappers did and prospectors, maintained a family in St. Louis. This is our real guy. As the folklore was extended into the Mishner novel, this is Joseph Conger, who was a prospector in the mid to late 1800s. And he's noted for noticing that the Indian princesses were wearing silver bangles on their arms. And then he went to consult with the chief of the Ute tribe in the area, and indeed the chief was on to him. So it's rumored that Conger started courting the chief's daughters to find out where indeed the prospect was. And it just so turns out that he's credited with the founding of the Caribou Mine in the area just west of Nettleton, Colorado. Story continues to grow and grow from folklore to real fact. And it turns out that the first geo that was done was the Colorado Scientific Community Society founder, Samuel Emmons. So the first prospector's real geomorphology was studied and cataloged by this famous gentleman. And then the Caribou turns into a town. And at its peak in the late 1800s, the town housed more than 2,000 full-time residents. This interesting photograph right here, including, a glacier and this little whale tail here, included hardware store, school, brothel, and hotel, and then all the other residential areas you can see. Note that many of the buildings are buttressed on this, on basically the east side. And that's because the winds up there can clock as high as 100 miles an hour. So you literally were buttressing the outside of your home or your building or your shop with these structures, as you can see in the photograph here. It was taken, I think, around 1892. Interesting historical figures of the state of Colorado milled around these prospects and became investors or financiers or legal advocates. And we know Mr. Moffett, as the Moffett Tunnel is named after him, and he's noted well for his engineering skills and surveying skills and his entrepreneurship in the rail business, but he was also a notable mining investor at the time. Senator Jerome Chaffee, the first senator of the state of Colorado, was also a notable investor. And at its peak, there were 27 active mines in a footprint of 4,000 acres. The landscape was denuded, of course, almost all vegetation, and it was a tough existence up in that area, especially these were full year-round operations. And I know from experience, the wind, I said, can get over 100 miles an hour, and the snow can come and it's 4 to 5 feet deep over a week-long period. So that's quite a bit. Eventually, as the turn of the century moved things forward, Robert Dunn bought one of the more productive mines and expanded its operations. And that was indeed the Caribou itself. And so the first instances of a consolidation began in this time period. And Robert Dunn also had a very notable partner, and his lawyer was Chester C. Arthur. And, quite remarkable when I found out that piece of history. It was somewhat hidden because Dunn's brother, who was actually running the mine, Robert Dunn of Dunn and Bradstreet, was running his business in New York as a financial advocate for startup businesses and those in need of financing. But at the time, before he became president, he was attorney and counsel to Robert Dunn at the Caribou. History has continued to progress, and the contributions that this actually had pop up in interesting places. So this is a picture I took of a silver deposit that was given to the Colorado School of Mines, and it's on display. And you'll note it's from the Grand Island District. So the Grand Island District is one of the locations that are outlined in what eventually became the Colorado Mineral Belt, and many people understand it as the comb. So the Colorado Mineral Belt, Grand Island is one of those interesting locations. Barbara was talking about Leadville. That was another notable location that was part of the Colorado Mineral Belt. But from a historical sense, the Caribou also has an interesting and notable neighbor, and this is the famous Caribou Ranch, which was established in the early 70s by the producers of Chicago and a few other famous musicians, and they created a recording studio, which still is the Caribou Ranch. The Walton family owns it at the moment. It's for sale. And Elton John recorded an album there called Caribou. And it gets a little more interesting. This is the cover of a Supertramp album. And in the background of this piano covered in snow, you'll see the peaks that surround the Caribou mine and the Grand Island District. But Michael Jackson, the Eagles, the Temptations, John Lennon recorded there. And folklore or history notes that the song All the Lonely People, he met a man that lived in a cabin nearby, and his name was Father Mackenzie, who was writing a sermon for no one to hear. So that, as you'll note, that's become quite a famous bit of the Beatles portfolio of songs. And if you ever go to Red Rocks, visit the museum that's there. And in it, there is a significant exhibit about Caribou Ranch. It eventually burned down and no longer served as a production studio around the 90s. But there's rumors that there's a potential interest to bring this back to life. Caribou today, this photograph is taken from about the middle of the town on that prior photograph that you saw. What remains is the stoneworks of a mill that was in existence in the turn of the last century. But as you can see, the beauty again of Rocky Mountain landscapes never failed to provide breathtaking opportunities just to sit back and meditate. This area has become one of the most popular areas for backcountry skiing, and the very well regarded and famous Jeep trail called the 505 intersects at about where I'm standing when I took this picture. So one end goes to the town of Eldora, and the other end goes to a beautiful place called Rainbow Lakes. And Jeep advocates and off-road advocates use this as long as the Forestry Service keeps the gate open. So it's shut down in the winter, obviously for safety reasons. In 1971, a man named Tom Hendricks, as a teenager, a late teenager, took a summer job to work in the Cross Mine, which is just below the Caribou Mine. And as a miner, he became hooked. And I kind of know how that is. I'm a MSHA certified miner myself, even though I'm history, sales, and marketing. It's a passion you actually fall yourself into. After working for a little bit there, he bought into a partnership in the Cross Mine, and then he and several partners really handworked it and earned enough money to produce, let's just say, an ability to buy out the Caribou Mine and incorporate that into the mining operations, which became Hendricks Mining in 1971. He experienced various financial troubles throughout the ensuing several decades, as most mining operations do that are in a low volume, high grade environment. But sometimes that's really where your best results can be if you're fortunate. The picture on the left is a ragtag group of miners that he put together. Just to say around 2015, 2016. And the picture on the bottom is actually the same building. So a lot of upgrades, a lot of investment was made, and he was able to associate some financial partners that shared his vision. Now, that also included a lot of rehab. So this picture shows the portal entrance to the Caribou Mine as it was in 2018. It was collapsed and shuttered. And, Tom had not mined any resource out of this since 1985. So in 2019, there was effort, investment, and there's some historical preservation that was actually ongoing in this project too. But it takes a lot. So this here is a mine that dates back to 1869. And here's some of the first efforts in this picture to rehabilitate it. And as things progress, you're refacing it. It takes a lot of equipment and skilled technicians and people that really know what they're doing. This is what it looks like today. You can see the shotcrete is now holding its position, and the opening, the portal, is now a 10 by 10. And so that means that there's a lot of mechanization that can actually go back and further move into the operational aspect of mining, which will be the next step. Just another shot of equipment. This stuff is fascinating. This is a large mucking machine, and you see the low profile, so that can go inside the mine portal. Not all of mining operations are inside. And so on the outside, you have to have protocols for water management because mines are always moving water as nature has it. So there were 5 settling ponds that were in need of rehabilitation. They all have to be dredged, drained, water diverted, and then a liner gets installed. And by the way, there's only one way to install a liner like this. You need about 100 men to pull around and stretch it because the machine can't do that. This is a larger liner at a lower pond. And of course, to maintain the proper standards for EPA and DRMS compliance, the slope right here had to be rehabilitated. That involved a lot of hard work. So these guys, very dedicated, engineers and MSHA certified miners were outside doing their thing. The job well done, full compliance, and now the pond is ensuring that the water that flows from this historical mining operation into Boulder Creek is cleaner than the water that the people in Boulder buy in a bottle at the store. And it, by the way, it's healthier because it has a little alkaline in it that the filtration takes out. And this was the crew that finished the job in 2021. On the business end side, mines are continually surveyed and drilled to establish further value. And the drill cores are housed inside, and they're boxed and labeled in what you can see in as they're stacked up right here. For any mining operation, you have to make the reports that you put into the marketplace, whether you're a publicly traded company or a small mining operation. If you want to present value of your operation, you have to be able to prove and justify that value through these core samples that are cataloged. And, you're looking at about $10 million in core right now. The analysis of the core continues as an ongoing business within the business. And again, you can see the core has color coding. Every one of those boxes is labeled. In each box are the core samples labeled. And in the bags on the floor, you're seeing the results of part of that core that's been crushed and analyzed and understood so that the profile of the mining operation and its value can be disclosed as a parts per ton in terms of ounce of gold or ounce of silver, or if this were a copper operation, it would have the same attributes. But the history of mining has not changed a lot. It's all about blasting a hole, mucking the debris, and extracting the valuable part of that debris as you've assessed in partnership with your engineer and your geologist and the guys that do the work. So this is a typical post-blast picture. And so these guys, their next job will be to go to the mucking stage and then the extraction stage. And it gets put on an ore cart, and then you process it, and then you take it to the later stages of concentrate and refining. And that's how gold mining and silver mining operate in the United States today to produce the end game. So in the latest catalog that represents the existing value of what 175 years of mining has still left behind in the Caribou Cross mine operation, is about 1.6 billion in gold. And that's been reported through a document called an SK 1300 to the SEC. But this is what it looks like in gold bars. Caribou and Cross are now under new management. Mr. Tom Hendricks passed away in the middle of the rehabilitation of the Caribou portal, which was sad to see. But this is what the operations look like at their entrance today. So the segue for that would be for me to take the history a little further, and that would be to talk about a project that's very near and dear to me, which is the cemetery that exists above the Caribou mine, east of that open field area where the township used to be. And that was a cemetery that was established at the late 1800s. And the number of bodies buried there is not exactly known, but it's suspected to be over 50 to 60. And these grave sites Some of them are known and identified, and some of them a lot of research has gone into. And that's what allowed my life to take a really nice turn. And I was introduced to this wonderful woman named Sylvia Pettum, who I know is near and dear to the group that I'm speaking to. And it's an honor for me to work with her, as she's volunteered to lead the effort to do the restoration at the cemetery. And I also have a lot of respect for her husband, Ed Raines, who is the curator of the uh, School of Mines Museum in Golden. But so, as a ending part of this discussion, and I'd be glad to open for questions on any elements, but this is where the fun begins. So the reclamation involves several steps. Tragically, many headstones were damaged or stolen. Marble at certain times of the last 2 centuries has had its significant value up and down. A family plot here on the right was gated, and of course, you're not going to stop the aspens. But we put together a volunteer team to take steps towards that reclamation. And the first part was to just clean out some of the debris, and the volunteers did a great job. You got a wood chipper there, you have chainsaws, you have manual labor, and just to clear out and get to the point where we can assess the depressions that were obviously graves, footers of headstones that were broken off, vandalized, and, as I said, stolen. And I'll note that the young man, the blonde hair, hauling that log is actually Tom Hendricks's young son. And this photograph was taken not too long ago. But that's an idea of what a footer of a headstone looks like after it's been damaged or stolen. And our first effort was to identify what could be identified, and that comes from good historical research. You got an obituary that might have indicated this grave from a newspaper that was published for just 2 years about the town of Caribou. Or you go down to the library in Denver, or you can go over to Colorado History, which I'm a member of, and go into the White Glove Room and go through some photographs that were taken of the cemetery at a time when maybe this was still standing. And this is where Sylvia has been an amazing advocate for this process and spent a lot of time and effort. And I greatly appreciate it, but there's others that also do as well. Here she is in the middle of the cemetery. The gate was installed, as you can see, after the volunteers put in multiple days of hard work, and it's seasonal. And we're trying to rehabilitate the rest of the property's boundary and bring a more sensible presence to it so that people don't camp out there or have a beer party and throw cans, on graves. So I really enjoy this picture of Sylvia here. We brought up some interesting researchers. This canine friend is a cadaver dog. And there were 4 of them working this day, running around, and their skill set is locating human bones. And they can do so even if they're buried pretty deeply underground. It's impressive and quite amazing. You can also see a footer of a gravesite just on the other side of where this wonderful canine is operating. And we enjoyed this day. The dogs would run around, and when they felt they believed there was a human remains underground in that area, the dog would sit down and wag his tail, and he or she would get a treat. So the handler is over here, and these handlers all travel together. And they advise, we are not search and rescue. You don't want our dogs to rescue you because it's already too late. So we enjoy the comedy. It's another fine canine doing the job. And the grad student at the far left with the flags in her hand, her job was to catalog where the find occurred. And then we brought in the GPS. And then, of course, the other research then ensues. So we are also in partnership with a CU faculty member who is an archaeobiologist. And I'd never heard of such a person or thing until I started this project. And in 1 week, I met two of them, and they were both named Lauren. And we introduced them to each other quickly, of course. We were also instrumental in raising some funds to actually have a marble memorial created by a stonemason in Marble, Colorado. So this is the same marble that is the Lincoln Memorial in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It's beautiful, as you can see. So this part of the memorial is a rendering of the Count of Caribou. And this is the back, where you have a ragged-ass miner in his burrow, heading up the slope to his mining operations. And I imagine that was the daily routine for these. Many of them were Cornish, and then some Irish came later. We've also made a rendering of Tom Hendricks on one end of it, and the other side, the other end has a Cornish cross, a Celtic cross, I'm sorry. This will go on the front of the entrance where that metal gate on a previous slide showed you that. And here's Sylvia, that's Tom Hendricks's grave she's contemplating. And her young friend there is my puppy, Pippo. So thank you for your attention. And I'd be happy to send out the photo essay side of that to anyone that's interested. And I'm happy to take questions, Barbara.
Okay, thank you very much, Peyton. Any questions or comments? Sylvia, anything you'd like to add?
I had to unmute there. I wasn't expecting to be the final photo in the presentation, but thank you, Peyton, for talking about our project and telling people about caribou. So
Yeah,
I'm curious to see what
appreciation
questions.
for what you've done. Of course, there's not just myself. There's more than a handful of people who have a great appreciation for what you've led there.
Thank you.
Aren't we supposed to go visit Marble after the Gunnison conference?
I don't know. I haven't seen the draft of the newsletter yet.
It is
Well, I
on.
recommend it. It's a fabulous place to visit, especially if they're doing their 6-week or 8-week long festival. They have stonemasons from all over the world who come in, and they camp out like a bunch of bohemians and just make this beautiful artwork, and you can walk amongst them and visit and talk and chat with them. That's a beautiful experience if you get a chance.
Anyone else?
Yes, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the historic preservation aspect of reopening the portal that you mentioned.
Yeah, there's a lot that's done to maintain an environmental sound approach to this, which is different than the way it was done in the late 1800s. And that's not necessarily just compliance with the regulations that involve curation of the actual water and the rock, the waste rock and the tailings in the attempt to make money producing gold. In the 1950s, our federal government actually stepped in and put a lot of infrastructure in place. They were looking for potash because back then that, you know, our nuclear program had just had its infancy kicked off by the end of a war. And so there's a lot of structural parts of that that has been preserved just for the historical purposes of what's there. That portal goes in 1.5 miles, and there's 5 levels, and there's some ballrooms, they call them, that you could put a 747 in. So it's a lot underground there.
Yeah. I was wondering about the coring as well. When did that requirement commence?
The chlorine?
Yeah.
No, there's
No,
no
no,
chlorine.
coring. The core.
Oh, the
The
chlorine. Oh,
requirement.
sorry.
Yeah,
That's
core.
um,
Sorry.
that's fine. No. In the mining world, drilling became very relevant to establishing the value of your prospect before production begins, by drilling core and analyzing the core. And that probably came about in the 1920s. And remember, we've had multiple impacts throughout history that have dramatically changed the mining industry overnight. You know, the silver panic of the late 1800s, going on and off of certain standards, gold, silver. Um, in World War II, Roosevelt made it illegal to hoard gold, and all gold mining stopped because of that. There were allotments to jewelry and heirlooms and things like that, and your silver set, but it was actually illegal to keep a bunch of gold bars in a safe in your basement, as well as gold. And a lot of it had to do that we were moving off and on the gold standard, and we'd actually lent off of our gold more than we could deliver. So during the World War II political pressures that were before and after the war, the United States was not able to deliver all the gold that it was obligated to deliver to the notes and lending that had been done. So, there are interesting currency equivalents that go to silver notes, silver certificates, gold certificates, and that had a great influence on the mining industry itself. And as well as, supply demand things that occur and global economic forces. Like now we're looking at gold knocking on $3,000 an ounce, which, quite remarkable.
I recall the government shut down the gold mines during World War II because they were not essential and they couldn't get any miners. And
that's right. We needed copper. We needed lead. We needed some stuff to hurl at the Nazis. So yeah, good point.
Hi, Peyton. This is Richard Reed. Love the presentation. It was awesome. Thanks so much. I'm also a geologist, and I was wondering if you mentioned that it was a gold mine. You mentioned it was a silver mine. I assume it was a gold and a silver mine. How would you characterize that deposit geologically?
So there's 2 ways to answer that question. It's a hydrothermal dynamic that has a sulfidic element to it. There are fluorites in the deposit. It is heavily weighted towards silver just because of the geomorphology. But there are some interesting anomalies. There's a magnetite dike in the back of the property. There's a peat bog that was part of a glacial alluvium. So we believe that the glacier that exists right behind the actual property probably carried a lot of the silver down that the early miners were able to get at shallow depth. But the hydrothermal dynamic in this area, and which it's typical of the comb, you have a sort of a tree structure. So you have, a trunk of tree, which is very deep, and then strong branches and then small branches as you go to the surface. And then that was the gold and silver, which found its way into Boulder Creek. And then if you go, one drainage over, you got Clear Creek and you got Coal Creek. And so that's why the French trappers were the first to find gold in itself. And so there were various waves of gold rushes in Colorado, which were kind of unique because they weren't really found by the traditional prospector. It was a trapper grabbing beaver pelts who was able to pan a few pieces of gold. And back then you actually had, real gold nuggets, which don't exist today. So the second part of the answer is the deposit itself can be in a sulfidic vein, or it can be in a nice, like a monzonite nice, which is really hard. And those can be in, the vein structures are looking for. Could be 6 ounces gold per ton and as high as 18 to 20 ounces silver per ton. But, Newmont was mining Cripple Creek and they're profitable at half an ounce per ton, but a small operation cannot be profitable at that grade. So I believe, especially in the state of Colorado, the best operations are high grade, low volume, and sulfidic in nature because the rock isn't as tough to deal with, and it's easier to handle the waste rock in that sense too.
Great, thank you very much.
Great question.
You mentioned the peat. When I started driving in the late 70s, I liked to go up to Caribou, and there was still a digger up there for the peat. I don't know whether it was the 60s, early 70s, but there was somebody up there getting the peat out, taking the peat out.
That'd have been Tom,
Oh, okay.
because he removed the peat so he could set up a drill rig. And so he did a couple wildcat drills, and he ran into a couple vein structures that were actually too good to believe in, but he's cataloged them. And then there was a off-road guru, kind of like a Dick Seepeck kind of guy, who created this off-road rally one day, and they tore up the peat bog so bad it broke Tom's heart. I think he even got a rifle or a shotgun out at some point, and so made national news. Miner disrupts off-road rally in the peat bog of Caribou. Fun little side story.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much, Peyton. That was a great
You're welcome. Thank you.
presentation. And next month, we've got Neil Hubritz on William Beauclair Otway. And hopefully Neil can send some of the warm air up here to the northern hemisphere that they've had down there. And then in April, Steve Hart will be telling us about the Gunnison field trips and tours. So hope to see you all then. Okay, thank you and good night.
I could disembodied hand.